this lecture, we're going to talk about fertilization, how fertilization happens, and contraception, which of course is how you prevent fertilization. So, fertilization is literally the fusion of egg and sperm, and this is an actual electron micrograph of an egg surrounded by sperm. And of course, only one of those sperm are actually going to fertilize the egg. When the egg and sperm, remember, they're both haploid. When they fuse together, they create a cell called a zygote. And that zygote is diploid. It's the one that will do mitosis to create a new individual. So here's what happens. This is the egg cell down here. And you can see that we've got the plasma membrane of the egg cell plus a jelly coat around it, and then of course the follicle cells. Remember, at ovulation the egg was released surrounded by a bunch of cells from the follicle. So that's what all of these are. So the sperm, when they get to the egg, the first thing they have to do is they have to squeeze between all of these follicle cells, and of course not all of them are going to make it. And then the next thing that happens is the acrosomal enzymes, those enzymes in the acrosome cap. They hit the jelly coat and they start to dissolve the jelly coat. And here's where a really cool thing happens, because remember, we have all of these sperm trying to fertilize the same egg, but only one sperm can fertilize the egg. If we have more than one sperm fertilize the egg, then we have too many chromosomes in the zygote, and it won't develop properly. So, as soon as one sperm's enzymes start dissolving this jelly coat, it causes a chemical reaction across the jelly coat that prevents any other sperm from crossing the jelly coat. And so only one sperm is able to get through. When it does that, the plasma membranes of the two cells fuse. Because remember, the sperm and the egg are just cells. So the plasma membrane of the sperm fuses with the plasma membrane of the egg, just like endocytosis, if anything else. And then the sperm nucleus here enters the cytoplasm of the egg. The egg nucleus, now remember, this is the point at which the egg actually becomes an egg. It's an oocyte before this. When the sperm enters, it then completes meiosis to creates a polar body and then a haploid nucleus. Then those two nuclei fuse to create a diploid zygote. Okay, so the N is one of indicates that they're one of each chromosome, and then of course here we have two of each chromosome. So we're back to a normal cell. Okay. Normally, fertilization happens in the fallopian tube. It doesn't always. Sometimes it can happen in the uterus, but normally the sperm swim all the way up through the uterus, through the fallopian tube to the egg. What about the sperm that swam through the other fallopian tube where an egg wasn't released? Well, they're out of luck. The zygote, then after fertilization, the zygote starts doing mitosis, and it's going to continue to do mitosis over and over and over again for about a week, until it becomes a ball of cells called a blastocyst, and that blastocyst is the thing that actually implants into the uterus. And at that point, a woman is actually pregnant. Okay, so there are a lot of things that can happen in this first week that can prevent implantation. We're not going to go into them for this class, but anyway, at this point, we have an actual pregnancy, and this is then going to develop into first an embryo and then a fetus. Now, of course, not everything always goes right, and one thing that can happen is an ectopic pregnancy, and that's where the blastocyst implants somewhere outside of the uterus. The most common site is within the fallopian tube. So this blastocyst, as it's doing mitosis, it's coming down. Instead of going all the way down into the uterus, it implants somewhere here in the fallopian tube. It can actually develop there for about 8 weeks. This fallopian tube can stretch a lot, but that's all. The fallopian tube cannot expand enough to accommodate a full pregnancy. The symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy usually occur when the fallopian tube starts to strain under the stress of this growing embryo. The woman may have severe cramping, bleeding. She may miscarry the ectopic pregnancy. But what often happens is that the fallopian tube itself bursts. And if that happens, women can actually die from internal bleeding, just from the bleeding of this fallopian tube. So it's really important in the case of an ectopic pregnancy that it be removed. And that does require a surgical procedure. And because of the way that this amniotic tissue that becomes the amniotic sac, the way that this tissue develops, it actually, some of these cells burrow their way into the wall of, well, they're supposed to burrow their way into the wall of the uterus. And of course, the uterus has this really thick wall that can accommodate that. The fallopian tube doesn't. And so, when the cells burrow into the uterus, they help to create the placenta that's attached to the wall of the uterus. Of course, the fallopian tube can't accommodate that. That also means that when this ectopic pregnancy is removed, you have to remove some of the tissue lining the wall of the fallopian tube. It cannot be reimplanted. It can't be moved into the uterus because of the way the cells grow into the wall. Now, that did not stop lawmakers in, I think, Alabama and Georgia, I really need to double check that, from passing laws saying that doctors would be required to move an ectopic pregnancy to the uterus, even though that is biologically impossible and surgically impossible. They still wrote it into a law and made criminal charges, made it criminal to not do that. So they wanted to subject women to unnecessary and, in fact, impossible surgeries because they believe that an ectopic pregnancy maybe could be saved. It can't be saved. It's not going to result in a live birth, ever. The only way, it sometimes happens every once in a while, and we don't understand why. Sometimes they just move into the uterus. Why? We have no idea. But we have no way to surgically move it. Those laws were blocked by the courts, so they are not in effect, but they were passed by state legislatures. And this is why it's so very important that you pay attention to who your legislators are, pay attention to who's running for office, and vote, because it really does make a difference. And the other thing I want to bring to your attention is that the removal of an ectopic pregnancy is technically an abortion. It is a removal of a pregnancy, even though it's a pregnancy that could never, ever result in a live birth. And, if left, could kill the mother. It has to be removed. There is no option. It has to be removed. It is still considered an abortion, and when you make abortion illegal, it is illegal to remove an ectopic pregnancy. So yes, in cases where jurisdictions have made abortion illegal, women have died from ectopic pregnancies because doctors were not willing to remove something that they knew would kill the woman. I just need to leave that there and make you understand what happens when people write laws without understanding everything involved in those laws.